To create the internal corner of your skirting boards, you've got two choices really. You can use a miter joint, but the problem with this is, in the likely event that your walls are out of square, you're going to create an open gap here, and that's not going to look very good at all. The method I prefer is to cut a scribe joint. Now to do a scribe joint, you leave one end of the piece square, and on the other end of the other piece, you cut a 45-degree angle. Now what that does, that gives you the shape that you need to cut out. I need to cut along this line here and along there at the angle, and then remove all this section here. Now when you make this cut, you want to cut it on a slight angle. That's called back cutting, because you don't want the back surface to foul up on the face, and that will allow for any discrepancies in the wall that's out of square. Just take your time and follow that line there. And when those two pieces come together, that just simply fits in like that. Now if your wall's out of square, it's not going to matter, because this is going to take up all those irregularities, and you get a nice tight joint. Now that method is okay for this straight cutting, or if you're using bevel skirting. But if your skirting is a little bit more intricate, such as this colonial skirting which has curves, the procedure is the same, but the cutting process is slightly different. You still cut a 45-degree angle at one end, and that'll give you the shape that you need to cut out along my pencil line here. We remove that material. But to cut these curves here, we need to use a coping saw. Now this is called a coping cut. So believe it or not, that's why we use our coping saw. So you put it in the vise, cut your straight cut with your hand saw. Just remember to back cut it a little bit. Hold the saw on an angle, and take your time when you're making this cut. Just follow the line. Turn it over and use the coping saw to follow these curves here. Just take your time. Now the idea of the coping saw, it has a fine small blade, and that enables us to get around the curves. One other tip with the coping saw, and a hacksaw for that matter, but I prefer to have my teeth facing backwards. It makes it a little bit easier for me anyway to cut on the backstroke. So if you're having trouble trying to cut with the teeth facing forward, try and spin the teeth around and see how you go. We might need to clean that up with a little bit of sandpaper, but let's see how we went. Hopefully we'll have a nice tight joint. Now that looks pretty good, and that'll allow for any variation in the wall. Let me just show you the back of the joint. Where I mentioned you hold your saw on an angle, if you have a look at that, that looks pretty ugly. But we're not really interested in the back of the joint, we just want the front to be nice and tight. So if my wall was out of square, that'll allow me to move my skirting at a different angle, but I'm still having a nice tight joint at the front, and that's exactly where we want it.